This past week, we witnessed a day in our country's history that will be embedded in our memories, similar to other days that we remembered where we were when we heard the news about, and we can fill in the blanks of those events of our lifetime, where we were on 9/11, when we heard the news of Kennedy got shot, for those of us who were born back then, when the shuttle exploded. On Wednesday afternoon, with my husband and daughter, we sat riveted to the television while my mind and body flooded with disbelief and an array of emotions flowing in every direction. We watched the sacred building of our nation violated and invaded by people filled with hatred. Many of us shared a similar situation as I've spoken to people this past week. I'm often amazed how timeless and timely is our Torah, and exactly on the right week. Its ancient words and lessons ring true thousands of years later in our modern world and society. In our Torah portion this week, Shemot, the first portion that begins the book of Exodus, we witness different acts of violence. The first kind of violence stems from Pharaoh's fear and perhaps based on a delusional presumption. A new king rose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He feared and presumed that the increasing number of Jacob's descendants would join forces with Egypt's enemies, and in the event of war, Egypt would be overtaken. So what did Pharaoh do? We read in the Torah, so they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And then this king ordered midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The violence we witnessed on Wednesday also stemmed from fear based on a delusional premise. The current president of the United States, in his delusional view of our country's fair elections, that it was stolen from him, incited his supporters to come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th to disrupt the electoral vote. We saw these rioters smash windows, roam the Capitol building with the Confederate flag, penetrate the Senate chambers, and ransack congressional offices. These mobsters appeared to be mostly, if not all, white, and I imagine many of them would call themselves Christian. Some clad clothing ready for a riot. Others wore Camp Auschwitz sweatshirts and T-shirts that were written on it 6MWE, and that 6MWE stands for 6 million wasn't enough. They were filled with hatred. They acted based on a delusion, and they acted out of fear. Fear that the landscape of their country is looking less white and less Christian, and fear that they are losing power. Now, this is not a delusion. Our country is changing in ways that we can celebrate. Lest we get bogged down in the negative, let us also shine a spotlight on Tuesday's Senate runoff elections in Georgia and the results. Reverend Raphael Warnock, a Black man, and John Ossoff, a Jewish man, won the U.S. Senate seats in Georgia. And as Rabbi London mentioned in her message to the congregation that came out in an email yesterday, as she said, what an inspiration for our entire country that we might truly become a multiracial and multi-ethnic democracy. A second act of violence we see in this week's Torah portion stems from anger and frustration. It comes from Moses. When Moses witnessed the injustice of an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen, he looked this way and that way, and seeing no person about, he struck the Egyptian, ultimately killing him. In our Tikkun Midot at Beth Emet, we studied anger as the midah or soul trait not too long ago. And we learned that not all anger is bad. Anger that channels us to rise up against injustices is a productive anger. What about the violence? Some would say that violence is never the answer, for Moses struck another human being. And whether or not it was his intention, Moses killed that taskmaster. Another interpretation of Moses' action is that his striking the taskmaster was an expression of his humanity. As our colleague, Rabbi Daniel Groper, focuses on the part of the verse in which Moses sees no person about, he says, Moses saw no one else stepping in to challenge the injustice he saw around him, and so he stepped up. His is the first example of Moses being an ish tzedek, a righteous person who stands for justice. The first century sage Rabbi Hillel taught, B'makom she'ein anashim, hishtadel lehiyot ish. In a place where no one is acting like a human being, anashim, ish, be the human, ish. Moses is not the only one in our Torah portion that responds to these orders of violence. We can turn to the women of Parashat Shemot to find another model to respond to violence. Earlier, we mentioned the names of Shifra and Puah, whom Pharaoh had ordered to kill the Hebrew baby boys. With reverence for God, Shifra and Puah defied this order for murder, and they let the boys live. And it was not these women alone. Yocheved, Moses' mother, hid her baby boy. Miriam, Moses' sister, minded the basket that held her baby brother as he floated down the Nile. And Pharaoh's daughter directed her handmaid to draw out of the water the basket holding this Hebrew baby. Pharaoh's own child, she understood that the violence which her own father called for was inhumane and unjust. In a place where she saw human life that needed not to be killed, but to be cared for, she stepped in, and like the other women on the trail before her, she acted like a human being. By nature and by nurture, no wonder Moses acts like such an ish. This too is our task. B'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel lihiyot ish. In a place where no one is acting like a human being, be the human, the ish. This week we've begun a new book in the Torah, the book of Exodus, where we move from slavery to freedom and recall the stories as we've begun the new year as well of 2021. Let us not only remember where we were when we learned the news of January 6, 2021, let us also remember in the weeks, months, and years to come, because of this news, where, what, and who we will be. Like Moses, Shifra, Puah, Yocheved, Miriam, Pharaoh's daughter and her maid, Hishtadel lihiyot ish. Let us be the ish. Shabbat shalom. And so now we share with you this second prayer for our country, written by Rabbi Stephanie Crawley. Lady Liberty is weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted. She cries, looking out at the city on the hill, overtaken by narrowness and violence by those who seek to mock her. She has been breached, the sacred steps of democracy trampled, the hallowed halls defiled, looted. Lady Liberty is weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted. Her flag waved by the very people who seek to destroy everything it represents. Her marble cracks and crumbles as the flames of hatred and injustice are fanned. Our house is divided. We pray it stands for what we hope it can be, what it has never been but always tried, reached towards, and what it has to be if it is to stand at all. We weep and cry out our impassioned prayer. God, who is the shield of justice, who implores us to spread peace, we pray we are able to help our democracy stand. We pray for help to never stop, to represent more fully one more person, to right one more injustice, to spread one more truth, to establish one more peace. We cry and we are not comforted, but we are together. We are not comforted, but we are rededicated. We will rededicate our country and its hallowed halls once again, this time through the steadfast commitment to every ideal we dream of. We will continue to bend our arc towards justice, towards honesty, towards truth. When the fire is out, we will raise the flag, clean the steps, repair the breach, and see our house stand, one house, one nation, in peace.